Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 75 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, we continue our 5-part series on DMV issues, DMV related topics. And I'm going to start on this subject with a very special announcement about part 5 of our series. So next week on the 29th, Wednesday, the 29th, we have, drum roll please, Chris Brooks. There should be like cheering and clapping in the background right now. We've got Chris Brooks coming on the podcast. He is going to talk with us about a number of different items, but Chris has saved my bacon many times. He has provided countless points of clarity on license questions that I've had for clients, on specific things that my client needs to do to get their license back. He has kind of gone in and fixed issues on the driving record for me. Been an incredible resource. People that have attended CLEs that are DWI specific in North Carolina over the last 5 years have probably at some point heard Chris present, because he has been really a great bridge to the defense bar from the Attorney General's office in explaining the statutory and case law related to DMV topics. He has really gone out of his way to help us as a defense bar provide better representation for our clients and to understand DMV questions. So an amazing point of contact, has always been incredibly gifted at getting back to me quickly. And I know that I am not the only attorney that is frequently pestering Chris with questions. So I am extremely humbled and excited to have Chris on the podcast next week. So make sure that you tune into that conversation. There's no better way to close down the 5-part DMV series than to close it down with the one and only Chris Brooks. So very excited about that. Just a couple of other quick items before we get into today's topic. Today, we're going to be talking about communication with and being in front of a DMV hearing officer. What are some tips for best practices of practicing in front of an administrative hearing officer at the DMV? So that's the conversation for today. 2 quick additional announcements before we get started on that front. First of all, I mentioned this a couple weeks back. We are fundraising for St. Jude Hospital. St. Jude's provides treatment for kids that suffer with cancer and helps take care of all of the bills and kind of related costs that families experience on the medical end of things. Has been a really powerful medical research agent in cures for cancer in kids. So just an incredible organization. We have raised over $28,000 for St. Jude's Hospital. As of today, we are shooting for $30,000 by the fundraisers, and the fundraiser, the walk run, is this Saturday. You can participate virtually. We're doing the one in Charlotte, but there are races across the country this Saturday. In North Carolina specifically, there is one in the Triangle area and one in Charlotte. So take a look at St. Jude's website and just look up St. Jude Walk Run, and there'll be kind of a locator for one near you. But if you're in North Carolina, we've got 2 coming up this Saturday, September the 25th. So go ahead and check that out. But also, if you would consider donating, we have put this on our firm's Facebook page. A number of attorneys at the office, including me, have promoted it on our individual Facebook pages. So just check out Minnick Law on Facebook and you will see a link to support St. Jude's. If you could give $5, $10, $20 to help us hit our $30,000 goal, we would greatly appreciate that. September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. So maybe forego a cup of coffee or a couple of cups of coffee, whatever it might be. That is kind of the way to spend a couple of extra bucks. And if you would consider giving that to St. Jude's, we would greatly appreciate that. Final announcement, we are competing. We are in the running for the Crisp Effect Challenge. You can vote for us also by going on the Facebook page on that front. The top 10 videos that get votes, and only attorneys can vote. So this audience right here is the right audience to be speaking to. Only attorneys can vote for this Crisp Effect Challenge. But if you go to our firm's Facebook page or to, again, my individual Facebook page, you can find me, James Minnick or Jake Minnick on Facebook. We would, again, greatly appreciate a vote from your firm. Each firm can only vote one time and only attorneys can vote in this competition. It is a competition of a number of attorneys that have participated in this particular challenge. And again, I would love if you would give me 5 minutes of your time to vote on that front. So sorry for all of the self-serving personal infomercials here on the podcast this morning. But today, diving into the topic at hand is how can you best practice in front of an administrative hearing officer? So we're going to go through 5 ways to improve your practice in front of an administrative hearing officer. So item number 1, or kind of tip number 1, is to understand what a administrative hearing officer's job entails. And I don't pretend to have a perfect understanding of what an administrative hearing officer does day in and day out, but I have a fairly good understanding of what they are doing when they're in the offices that I regularly have practiced in front of them. I think I have been in front of probably between about 5 and 7 different hearing officers in my time in practice. So I have interacted with a number of these administrative hearing officers, been very impressed with the ones that I have practiced in front of in terms of how they handle schedule and demands. So again, I've seen a number of different hearing officers in action, but I think it's helpful to remember a little bit about what their job entails. So an administrative hearing officer is covering, first of all, a lot of ground. They are going all over their area. The hearing officer that is currently covering Asheville, where I am, is based out of Hickory, and she travels all the way out to, or covers hearings all the way out to Cherokee and Clay County. So it's probably about a 4.5-hour drive from where she is located out of all the way over to the westernmost counties in the state. So it is a ton of driving and travel time. There is a ton of time on the road, many nights spent away from home. And I don't think by any means that is unique to her. I think most of the administrative hearing officers that we have throughout the state deal with this kind of difficulty in terms of scheduling and in terms of travel time. So it is one of the most kind of difficult things, I think, for people to work through when it comes to being able to cover that many counties and that much ground. So that's the first thing to remember, is that this is a difficult job when it comes to how much ground is being covered. The second thing is, in terms of covering that ground, they're working out of makeshift temporary offices. The Asheville office does have basically a room dedicated to the hearing officer, but not every county has that. So, picking up and packing up your computer and everything else that you're operating off of, laying it down in one county this day, one county the next, moving all of your files, making sure that you have all of the correct files with you before you make this 4.5 hour drive out to some distant county, or even if it's closer, 30-minute drive, whatever it might be. It's a lot of moving around. In terms of what I see in Asheville, there is not a lot of personal interaction with other people at the DMV. There's not going to be a lot of familiar faces when you're traveling around to all of these locations. Hearing officers a lot of times don't interact with the police officers that are sometimes called into hearings anywhere near as much as a DA does. So in terms of having a personal relationship with any of the actual officers that are on the ground, again, not a whole lot of interaction. And certainly in terms of the people that are coming in front of them, which are people, licensed drivers of North Carolina, that are going in front of them for a speeding violation hearing or an out-of-state ticket revocation hearing, a DWI restoration hearing, a DWLR restoration hearing. All of these items, all of these specific hearing issues. Again, hearing officer doesn't get to see this person routinely, the licensees that are coming in front of them. And so all that is to say that this, I think, could be a very lonely position and a very kind of isolated position. I don't know how many times a year all of the administrative hearing officers get together. I don't know what that looks like. But again, in terms of seeing kind of familiar faces and being able to create a lot of relationships in these counties, maybe some people are better at doing that than others. But I think it's just important when you walk into the hearing room to understand this hearing officer may have spent yesterday in a hotel away from their family, come in to the hearing this morning, has a full day's worth of hearings. They are backlogged. There are so many hearings that are scheduled currently in North Carolina. And yeah, from our perspective, that's frustrating to have a client that has to wait 6 months to get a hearing. But the reason they have to wait 6 months is because these hearing officers are currently understaffed. They are trying to deal with a ton of individual hearings that cover a broad array of different issues, huge amounts of paperwork that follow all this. So it is a demanding and difficult job. So just having some sense of what the hearing officer's day looks like, I think gives a better appreciation to what they are doing, how they are kind of helping, licensed drivers get back on the roadway, whatever it might be. This is a demanding job. So recognize that. Again, there's no specific kind of touch point on that front, but that, I think, should be in the back of your mind whenever you're trying to communicate with a officer on the phone or waiting to get information back during the hearing itself. Again, it always feels like at the hearings that we're the only people there, because unlike court, where they have 50 attorneys in the courtroom and 200 people in the courtroom, and sometimes 3 DAs in the courtroom and 6 bailiffs and 2 clerks and a judge. Again, that's maybe in your larger counties, but all of these people in the courtroom waiting for their case to be called. It can feel sometimes like we're the only thing that matters at the DMV, because they're actually good at scheduling people to come in at a specific date and time. And so you don't have 10 people in the hearing officer's room. It's you and your client. And, maybe somebody that was just in front of you just came out of the hearing office, but it's just you and your client. So it can feel like, well, we're the only thing in front of the hearing officer. We're the only thing that matters. We're the only thing on the hearing officer's plate. And that is just far from the truth. The hearing officers in our state are covering a lot of ground, and they're dealing with a lot of individual hearings. So tip number two, try to introduce yourself to the hearing officer before a hearing. If you have never had a hearing, or if you are newer in terms of practicing at the DMV, or you have a new hearing officer that is going to be covering that ground, try to introduce yourself to the hearing officer ahead of the hearing. So, begin doing that by means of a phone call into the hearing officer. Try to have a conversation, hey, I've got an ignition interlock hearing coming up. I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the right dates for that ignition interlock hearing. Please let me know if you need me to provide any information about who I am, or if there's anything that you have that would be helpful for me to speak about with my client. I'd be more than happy to communicate that. Try to open up the lines of communication before you walk in for your hearing. So try to do that over the phone. And then obviously this is sometimes difficult to do when hearing officers are booked so tightly, because you actually may not have a ton of time to do this on the day of the hearing, but always also try to introduce yourself in person ahead of the hearing. So what I typically try to do, and this has become a little bit more difficult with COVID, because now, most of the locations that I practice at in the Asheville area, you have to wait outside the DMV until the hearing officer comes out and calls your name. But what I used to do kind of in the pre-COVID days, and this may be true currently in some of the areas of the state, is I would used to go in, try to find the hearing officer ahead of the hearing, 15 minutes, 20 minutes ahead, and just say, hey, my client and I are here, no rush. Just wanted to let you know that we're here for the hearing at 12:30. How's everything going? How's the day been so far? And just try to chit chat a little bit. Generally, some hearing officers, and this has been kind of hit miss, but some hearing officers will kind of have a helpful conversation with you about the hearing coming up and saying, hey, I noticed that we've got this ignition interlock hearing. I've looked over the logs. Here's what I'm going to be asking about. I've had hearing officers get very specific about that. Not everybody is going to do that. Some hearing officers have kind of held their cards close to the vest and basically said, okay, well, thanks for letting me know that you're here. See you at 12:30. But I always feel like just that kind of personal introduction is helpful. It's also helpful for your client, because then when you come into the hearing room with your client and the hearing officer says, tell me your name and tell me your client's name, it's very clear to the hearing officer or to your client that you don't have any prior interaction with this hearing officer. And that's scary, right? From the client's perspective, it's like, dang, I've got this attorney and he's clearly never been in front of this hearing officer. He doesn't know this person. And, has he ever been in a hearing before? What does this look like in the past? Whereas even if there's just been a brief introduction ahead of the hearing, you can give your client a little bit more feeling of calm and confidence that, okay, my attorney knows the players that are kind of involved in this particular situation. He has an understanding of how to communicate with this person. This isn't his first rodeo deal. So that's, I think, a helpful thing for your client to be able to have that confidence that, again, this isn't your kind of first interaction with this person that is holding the fate of their license in the hearing officer's hands. It's helpful for them to be able to see, okay, there's some understanding here of who this person is and what's going to happen in this particular setting. So again, I think it's both helpful in terms of being able to more effectively communicate with the hearing officer, but also in helping your client have a sense of calm and lack of anxiety about the whole situation. And it's a very anxiety provoking situation. Your license is on the line. It's kind of like your life is on the line. So anything that you can do to give a little bit more of an anxiety free feeling is going to be critical to your client. Number three. So tip number three, always be polite and respectful. Always be polite and respectful. Always be polite and respectful. You're recording your car, wherever you're listening to this. your phone did not just glitch. I am saying the same thing repeatedly because it is very important. Okay. So a hearing officer is an administrative hearing officer is not a judge, right? They're not a district court judge, not a superior court judge, but that is how you should treat them, right? That's how you should interact with them. That should be the tone. If you send an email to a hearing officer, it should be like you are sending an email to a judge. Okay. That's the tone that you should present yourself. That's how you should be communicating yourself to this person in the hearing. When you're talking with the hearing officer, you should speak to them like they are a judge. That doesn't mean you can't be friendly with them and again, talk about what's going on in life and what their schedule looks like for the week. But when the hearing starts, you need to be communicating to them like you would communicate to a judge. You need to communicate to them like you would communicate in district court if you were in front of a district court judge. It's really important to know how to speak to a hearing officer. If you're on the phone, same thing. Communicate to that hearing officer like he or she is a judge. And the reason why I think that's sometimes difficult to remember is that the hearing officer in here, refusal hearing, a restoration hearing, a speeding ticket hearing can sometimes feel like a prosecutor when they are asking questions. So they can ask questions that could be really kind of damning in terms of the information that's going to get gathered from your client. They can ask, I've seen different hearing officers have different styles, but I've seen several hearing officers that take very much this like investigative officer, where were you on the night of the 25th? Kind of with the light shining in your eyes kind of style of questioning. And it is very kind of, direct and kind of, off-putting in terms of the client think, oh my gosh, like this is the person that's responsible for determining if my license is going to be taken away or not. And they're, talking to me like an interrogator. Am I going to get waterboarded here in a second? So that can kind of sometimes feel how the hearing officer is communicating to your client. And what is the response? Well, if you're a good attorney, a good advocate, you want to respond to that sometimes with kind of the same like acerbic, visceral, tone in terms of cross-examination or even in terms of closing argument, kind of wearing this in this personal way of, let me set this straight. Let me tell you how, what my client has done right. And that is the wrong tone because again, although the hearing officer to some extent is playing the role of prosecutor in certain hearings, they are always playing the role of decision maker. They're always playing the role of judge. They hold your client's license in their hand. And so polite and respectful tone is critical. It is absolutely critical. Do not get sucked into an argumentative style. It doesn't mean that you can't go after maybe a police officer that is testifying at a DMV hearing or another witness that is testifying at a DMV hearing, but do not carry that argumentative style to the judge. Don't treat or to the hearing officer. Don't treat the administrative hearing officer as you would treat a DA. And I try to treat DAs with the same politeness and respect as well, because you got to come back and deal with the same DA the next day. So it doesn't really help in that context. But again, in terms of argumentation or kind of being at odds with this person that's on the other side of the table, that's not how you want to see it. The administrative hearing officer, you should have the same tone that you would have with a judge with that hearing officer. Tip number 4, and this is going to piggyback on tip number 3, is that you want to communicate to your client the tone that they need to have with the hearing officer. So make sure that your client understands the polite and respectful nature of their dialogue with the hearing officer, in addition to you communicating that polite and respectful tone to the hearing officer. So make sure that you tell them, look, the person that is sitting on the other side of the table, they're the ones that are responsible for deciding whether or not you walk out of here being able to drive or you walk out of here not being able to drive. It is black and white, that simple. They're the ones that control this decision. So I am going to communicate. I, your attorney, am going to communicate to them with a respectful and humble tone. That's how I'm going to communicate. That is typically kind of my personal style in the courtroom anyways, but I think it's ultra important in an administrative hearing. It's ultra important in a DMV hearing to have that polite and respectful tone. So communicate to your client, this is how I'm going to present things. Don't perceive this as weakness. Don't perceive this as I'm not trying to set the record straight. This person that's sitting on the other side of the table is the judge. They are the ones deciding whether or not you get to keep your license. And so you're going to see me communicate to them in a way that is polite, respectful. Again, I'm going to use persuasion in terms of any closing argument that I give, in terms of trying to redirect the conversation, in terms of making sure that I extract information from witnesses that is going to be helpful to our position, but nothing is going to be directed personally at the hearing officer. There's going to be no tone of disrespect towards the hearing officer during the hearing. So just expect that. Don't think that I'm bending over or that I am not going to fight for you in the courtroom. You need to know that this is going to help us in the long run, because this is the person that controls the decision of whether your license remains intact or not. Moreover, and so you continue to talk to your client. Moreover, you, Mr. Client, need to have a polite and respectful tone with the hearing officer. Going into the hearing and demanding that your license be reinstated and complaining about how unfair it was that it was taken in the first place and that it should have never been taken and how you've been wronged is not going to help us either maintain or restore your driving privileges. It's not going to help us if we go in with this demanding tone. We need to go in with a tone of politeness, a tone of respect, a tone that I understand that driving is a privilege, not a right. I will not abuse that right in any way if it is given back to me, but humble, tail tucked between your legs is the way that we want to go into the hearing, telling the hearing officer, we understand that you have the power and the ultimate decision-making authority as to whether or not my driving privileges remain intact or are restored, whatever the case may be. I understand that. I understand that, this is completely your decision. And I want to let you know why I won't let you down if you decide to give me my license back or let me keep my license. I'm not going to let you down. And here's the reasons why. So again, it's okay to be persuasive. It's okay to go in and communicate why your client deserves to have their license back, why your client deserves to maintain driving privileges, how they're going to use that to better their family, their community, provide for themselves, how they're going to, be able to save, thousands of dollars potentially and other transportation fees, whatever the case may be. You have the ability to go in and argue that. But again, you got to argue it with a tone of respect. If you go in demanding things, you are really setting yourself up for failure. There's probably one sure way of not having things go your way in a DMV hearing, and that is to basically go in and say, driving is a right for my client. It is a right. It's not a privilege. My client should get their license back, and you better not stand in the way. That's like a surefire way to have your client walk out of there with no driving privileges. So make sure that you are conveying not only, like we talked about in point number 3, your own tone of politeness and respect, but conveying that your client needs to carry that with them as well. Finally, point number 5, and this is a really important point for some types of hearings. For others, it's maybe not all that helpful. But if you have a legal issue that you are dealing with in a hearing, this happens a lot more in a refusal hearing than it happens in a restoration hearing. A restoration to me is a character hearing. There is not a lot of law that gets argued in a restoration hearing. But in terms of a ignition interlock hearing, whether you're arguing specific factual pieces of information or whether you're in a refusal hearing, arguing some area of law as to why the officer didn't have reasonable grounds to believe that your client had committed an implied consent offense, or as to why no willful refusal occurred, whatever the case may be, if you have a legal issue, overly explain that legal issue. There are some DMV hearing officers that have a law degree. So some DMV hearing officers went to law school, have obviously had a lot of training and internal training, and that's true of all hearing officers. But there are some hearing officers with a law background. Other hearing officers do not have a law degree. They might have a law enforcement background. They may have kind of no prior law enforcement background. So when you are arguing a legal issue in the DMV, you are an educator. Okay. And it doesn't mean that the hearing officer is dumb about a specific issue. It doesn't mean that they don't understand a legal issue, but it is a situation where you want to communicate as much as possible why the law is favorable to your client, if that's the case. So go through it. Don't just basically say, well, this wasn't a refusal for XYZ reason. Say, let's look at this case and go through the facts of that specific case. Let's look at this particular statute and go through the statute in detail, because a couple of reasons. First of all DMV hearings are recorded. Some of them, like a refusal hearing, can be appealed, and there is a record on appeal that is created in the hearing. So you're not only kind of creating the legal basis for the hearing officer to rule in your favor, but if the hearing officer doesn't and the case gets appealed down the road, the superior court judge now has all of these arguments laid out in front of them and also sees that you made those same arguments in the hearing. But you want to overly communicate and educate the hearing officer as to why the law should be decided in your client's favor. Again, this is not to assume that the hearing officer doesn't have a good legal understanding of the issues at play in the DMV. They probably have, in all honesty, a better understanding than 95% of the bar, right? I mean, probably 95% of the criminal bar, like not just 95% of attorneys generally speaking, but 95% of the criminal bar. So these are individuals that really do have a great understanding of what is at play in a refusal hearing in terms of issues. But again, specifically diving into a particular case or portion of the statute that is at play, don't rush through it. Take your time, have a copy of the case that is in your favor, or the statute that is in your favor, ready to present to the hearing officer. Let them know that that is their copy, that they can review it, and then read from it why the law supports your client's position. Again, we should be in the role of educator in an administrative hearing before an administrative hearing officer, not so much in this kind of argumentative, persuasive role. Again, don't go in there in terms of communication of closing argument. And again, this is a strategy point. So if there's attorneys out there that are like, this is just total garbage, I'm going to go into the hearing and basically just go great guns advocating for my client, maybe there's room to disagree on this last point in terms of strategy. But if you go in, again, basically saying the law demands that my client's license be reinstated and you have to rule in my client's favor, versus saying, here's why the law supports my client maintaining their license. It's for X, Y, and Z reasons. I'm going to communicate those thoroughly. The law allows Mr. Smith to maintain his license because of these things, because of these facts and the way that it pans out. If you can use this as an educational opportunity, just from a human standpoint, you put the hearing officer from being backed up against a wall when you're arguing and forcing this stuff in their face. You put them from being backed up into a corner into being able to say, okay, that makes sense as to why this applies in this particular context. And the law does appear to be in this person's favor. So again, strategy point, again, maybe not everybody agrees with that, but I think that just trying to educate the hearing officer and make sure that they thoroughly understand your legal position is much more important than just kind of carrying this, great guns approach of just fighting it tooth and nail, everything, and just shouting at the hearing officer as to why your client deserves to maintain or have their license restored. It's helpful to go in with this, again, kind of calm, educational tone of here's why the law supports my client. So we will end there. Again, we've got 4 out of the 5 parts of our DMV hearing series in the bag. So DMV month, September DMV hearing month, we're almost through. And again, looking forward to having Chris Brooks on the podcast next week and speaking with you all at that point. If you found the information in this podcast to be valuable, I simply ask that you pay it forward and share this podcast with another member of the legal community. Also, if you would leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you are listening on, I would greatly appreciate it.